Rubber bullets, tear gas, water cannons, live rounds. Can Kenya's police beat the defiance of a new generation into submission? We can show you scenes from Monday's Saba Saba Day marches that marked 35 years since the spark of the movement that led to a return to multi-party rule. We'll ask about the 31 dead on the day. According to some, the increasingly heavy hand of authorities since last year's anti-tax demonstrations and the demands of the so-called Gen Z movement. Ahead of Saba Saba Day, there was the funeral in his home village of 31-year-old blogger Albert Ojwang, who died last month in the hands of police custody. How much of a test for Kenyan democracy? One of the few democracies in the region. President William Ruto, who in a past life was cleared over post-electoral violence at the International Criminal Court, had managed to recast himself as a mainstream politician, courted on the world stage. He's defiant in the face of those calling for his departure before the end of his mandate in 2027. What next for Ruto and the largely leaderless movement that's defying him? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at that crackdown in Kenya. And joining us from the Kenyan capital, Member of Parliament Robert Pukoze Satya, the ruling UDA party, your home constituency in Embes in the west of the country. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for France 24.
Otieno Namwaya, Associate Director for Africa at Human Rights Watch. Welcome to the show. Francis Owino, president of the social justice movement. I'm going to mispronounce this, I'm sure. Francis, tell us what is it Bunje la Mwananchi? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me over. Thank you.
What does Bunje la Mwananchi mean in English?
It's a social justice movement that emphasizes on fighting on the rights of a common mwananchi.
Okay, well, welcome to the show.
Mwananchi means the people.
The people.
And bunge means people parliament.
Okay.
In a nutshell, bunge la mwananchi means the people's parliament.
Well, thank you for joining us. France 24 correspondent Olivia Bizot has been following this story throughout. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Hi, Francois. Good to be here.
You can always listen, by the way, to the show. That's right, listen to it wherever podcasts are streamed. Kenya's president had stayed mum in the immediate aftermath of Monday's violence across the country. William Ruto choosing a visit to a police station this Wednesday, a police station expansion project to break that silence and break it forcefully.
Anybody who's going to set ablaze anyone's business or property should be shot in the leg, then be taken to hospital and taken to court. They shouldn't kill him, but break their legs so they can go to hospital and court afterwards.
Olivia Bizot, what else did the Kenyan president say in the face of those protests and the crackdown?
Yeah, so as you said, Francois, that's the first time that President William Ruto has spoken since Monday's deadly protests. In that speech, he also said that anyone that goes against security forces would be starting a revolution against the government, would be starting a war against the government. And he also said that although the Gen Z have been calling for his resignation and most of the people in this protest movement, he said that he will not step down and that people will have to wait for the 2027 elections for that to be able to happen, for a change of government to be able to take place.
Yeah, let me ask you, Otieno Namwaya, is this just a tradition that police, like in many parts of Africa, react with a heavy hand, or is this something different?
Thank you very much. As Human Rights Watch, we have been tracking and monitoring what has been going on during protests since 2023. And we have noted a very marked difference in the way the Kenya police have operated for the last 2 years from the way the Kenya police have operated before. Kenya police generally have not had a very good record. They have been violent, there have been killings, there have been all manner of abuses. But the scale of abuses that have taken place for the last 2 years has been shocking. We have had abductions, we have had shootings, we have had police treated protesters as if they are criminals. We have had political leaders calling protesters terrorists or people who are bent on overthrowing the government. So the whole protest that is supposed to be protected under the Constitution has totally been reframed and made to look like it's an attempt to overthrow the government. And because of that, the police have been set loose on the protesters as if they are criminals.
We have on this issue, but let me ask you, Robert Pukoze Satya, is there a strategy of making this a more violent showdown on the part of the government, as has been the accusation?
Thank you. What I would want to say is that we've had demonstrations in Kenya since 91, 92, and even before that. You remember the Right Honorable Raila Odinga talked about the multi-party, the fight for multi-party, 91, 92. During that time, I was a student at the university, and I was actually a student leader in SONU 92 as a congressman. And the demonstrations that we were doing were demonstrations that were peaceful, not burning people's property. Even now, under our constitution, the constitution allows for peaceful, unarmed demonstrations where you are not armed. But unfortunately, when the GenZs came in, initially it was peaceful. They were even moving with their phones. But in between, you find that we now have people who have infiltrated those demonstrations. And these people, having infiltrated these demonstrations, they are causing mayhem. They are destroying people's property. They are burning people's businesses. They are looting. And this is not a demonstration for change. This is not a demonstration to express yourself, because in demonstrations, people have demands. And you remember the president went into even X-Space to be able to engage the youths, to be able to engage the GenZs on what their demands were. But of late now, you find that people are coming out, destroying people's property, they are going to looting, and I think this is getting out of hand. And therefore, I think the police should be able to come and protect the property of people. They must come and protect people's lives, and that they must be able to restore order. And I think that is where we need to go, so that demonstrations are guaranteed under our constitution. There are human rights violations which should not be committed, but both by the police and also the demonstrators. When you find that demonstrators are now entering into people's properties and destroying them, and this could be able to get out of hand, and I think that is where the president is coming to emphasize that we must be able to do within the law, not outside the law. Let's stick to the law and be able to do our demonstrations in a manner that respects property and respects life.
There was a lot of reporting on, you talk about infiltrators, and it appears as though on Monday there was a lot of reporting about gangs that, in full view of the police, were beating up on demonstrators. What is your response to the video evidence of that?
I think it is on both sides. Even those who are with the, we had businessmen. These businessmen, after their properties were looted on the 25th of June, they decided now to hire people to protect their property. And I think some even went further than that, because what happened at the Kenya Human Rights Commission, I think that is a very wrong thing that happened, where we had people coming on motorbikes and trying to, and interfering with a meeting of the women who had assembled at the Kenya Human Rights Commission. I think that is not allowed. That is a violation of their rights. And where you have people hiring if you are bringing in people to protect your property, I don't think there is anything wrong with that, because you are protecting your property. Because as you look at the number of the Kenya police officers, they are not. We do not have enough police officers to be able to protect everybody, and therefore, if these demonstrations are happening all over the country, the police officers are also overwhelmed, and therefore you'll find that some businessmen decided that we need people to be able to protect their property, because on 25th you saw people's properties were banned. Even on Saba Saba, you've seen when you go to one of our local stations, the Citizen, there's a lady who has an employees of about 300, and her properties, her supermarket has been looted and properties destroyed, even one of the supermarkets being banned. I think that is not where we want to go as a country.
Francis Awino, those two big demonstrations referred to there by Robert Pukoze. Let me ask you, what was your personal experience when it came to both June 25th and Monday?
May I say something? Because I have listened to what my fellow friend has said, and I will say that is not the right way to go. Because the motive of we, as the people of this nation demonstrating, number one, we emphasize on Article 37, which gives us the right to demonstrate. Number two, we try to raise our voices so that the government can hear us. It is documented beyond reasonable doubt that those people that were looting were the people that were brought by the government so that the demonstrators can be seen as evil people.
Francis, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to interrupt you just because the sound quality needs to be fixed. Apologies on our end. We're gonna try to call you back and get that connected immediately to have it fixed. This issue of who's committing the violence is a big one. There have been 50 killed in the last 2 weeks of demonstrations. And for instance, on top of tending to the wounded from Monday's demonstration, at least 2 Nairobi area hospitals on Tuesday were picking up the pieces from vandalism in Kitengela, south of the capital. Staff members say they were met with dozens of unidentified attackers armed with clubs who forced their way into the hospital, demanding treatment for their colleagues.
Police came, but unfortunate is that the goons were all over. So they had to deal with them even from before entering the facility. They had to deal with them from outside. And you could actually see them touching they started with the chatter around the gate, and then they were now throwing fire inside the facility near the laboratory area.
Otieno Namwaya, have you been able to document who's perpetrating this kind of violence?
Yeah, like I mentioned, is that we have been monitoring what has been going on. There were protests in 2023 where we noticed the presence of goons. And then we did the same last year during the protests and finance bill protests, which ended up into parliament. We also noted a very heavy presence of goons. Now, this year, it looks like it has become official. The difference between what we have been seeing now and the goons or the people who caused violence in the previous violence is that in 2024, we noted that some of those people were being ferried by government vehicles. Particularly the county government of Nairobi ferried some of the people who looted parts of Nairobi last year. And then after they finished that, they went and converged in front of the headquarters of the county government of Nairobi for payment. Then we also noted this year that particularly on when people are protesting the killing of Albert Ojwang, the people who arrived in the afternoon carrying those batons were actually escorted by the police. And then they started attacking the protesters, and then later on they participated in the looting. In the protest the recent protest of Saba Saba, that is July of 7th and the 25th.
I want to tell those characters,
you listen to business people whose businesses were looted, they will tell you that the people who are looting those businesses were not protesters. And I think this has been captured widely in the media.
And Otieno, let me ask you, to the point that was made there by Robert Pukosi, that there just aren't enough police, and in some cases, businesses do need to hire security.
Yeah, that is because what we have noted is that because the authorities want to use police to beat people, but if police were to be deployed to just protect the protesters so that the protests are not infiltrated, I think there should be enough policemen to protect the protesters and ensure that the protests go without violence. If you watch the example of Mombasa, where protests have also been going on, where the police chose the route of negotiating with protesters and agreeing on the routes and the modes of protest and protecting the protesters, there have been very little violence in Mombasa. But in Nairobi and other parts of Kenya, where the police and other government officials have decided to criminalize protests, there is violence, because the violence starts when police begin to shoot protesters or fire tear gas inside the protesters, and people start to scatter. And then with the formalization of goons and other informal groups, we begin to see a lot of violence, because then when the protesters scatter, the goons take that space and begin to loot and beat people alongside the police.
Olivia Bizot, tell us about your experience covering June 25th and covering Monday's protest.
Well, I think, so especially the protest that took place on Monday, there was an incredibly heavy police presence. I mean, the police were absolutely everywhere. From early in the morning on Monday, police blocked the major routes going into the centre of Nairobi. No motorbikes or cars were allowed in. And when I was there, the scenes were shocking. I mean, all the shops were closed. The streets were completely deserted. The city was under lockdown. And police were absolutely everywhere, almost in every street. Also, on the protest on the 25th of June, at the beginning, in the first half an hour when I was there to cover the protest, people were allowed to protest peacefully, but just for about 30 minutes. And then the police started firing tear gas non-stop and dispersing a lot of the protesters. During that protest on the 25th of June, I also saw protesters being whipped by the police, being attacked. And I think it's important to mention that it's not just during the protests, but this police activity is going on at other times as well. Recently, before the June 25th protests, our team here in Nairobi published a report to raise awareness about the abductions that have been taking place. And I spoke in that report to an activist called Jamil Longton, and he told me that he was abducted with his two brothers in August of last year. He told me that he was abducted about 100 meters from his home. He was taken to an unknown location where him and his two brothers were beaten almost daily, with police trying to get information on how these mandomanos, which is Swahili for protests, are being funded. And he said and insisted that he had absolutely no idea, and said that these protests weren't being funded by anyone. And I think that's what's so important to mention about these protests, is that unlike previous protests, they're not being backed by a particular politician, but that really a grassroots movement with no specific leader. So those abductions have also been taking place. Human rights organisations have documented hundreds of illegal detentions in the past year, and so far there have been no convictions. And there's also the police violence you can see after the death of Albert Ojwang, the blogger who's a government critic. He posted a social media post criticising a police chief, and a few days later he was found dead. And the police initially said that he lost his life by suicide, but a post-mortem later revealed that he was actually violently attacked while in police custody. So that death definitely caused a huge amount of outrage in Kenya, and definitely contributed to the large numbers that took to the streets on the 25th of June, and of the amount of protesters who were trying to take to the streets on Monday.
Yeah, there was Kenya's Interior Minister who also sparked outrage. Kipchumba Murkomen, a lawyer by training, he's been sued over remarks he made on camera speaking to police the day after the violence of June 25th and the anniversary of those anti-tax protests.
We will not tolerate this again. No more attacks on police officers, police stations, or any government offices. What happened yesterday was the last time. Do you hear me? You've been given a gun. I haven't. And it's not just for decoration. If anyone tries to attack a police station or a police officer, defend yourself first. We'll explain afterward. Do you understand?
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
These are not just my instructions. They come from higher up.
Francis Owino, have you noticed, again, this change over the last 2 years in terms of the response of authorities to the protest movement?
Yes, I have noticed. I want to get you back in 2013 when we were doing demonstrations regarding the Unga revolution, when the price of Unga and the price of basic commodity was beyond the people of this nation. We demonstrated, and the people of this nation found justice because the government decided to subsidize the basic commodity like Unga. Last year, when we felt like the finance bill is not in order, we were the first people who started sita. And we did our demonstration and took a petition to Parliament so that we can emphasize on the right of a common mwananchi. And from that position, we created an uprising, and whatever happened last year. We lose a lot of people, we lose a lot of comrades, and it went like that. This year, we tried to emphasize, and we are trying to fight for the right of a common mwananchi. Whatever you are seeing right now, it is not because one of us died, the blogger who was called Kajuan. It is because the people of this nation feel aggrieved, and anything that can bring them out of their homes so that they can demonstrate, they just take advantage of it. The price of basic commodity have gone higher. No one can afford schooling. I'll give a good example. Like before last year, taking a government student to university, it costed you less than 30,000 Kenya shillings. Right now, you cannot afford to educate your kids toward a higher level because you must spend more than 300,000 per semester. Now it comes a time where the government promises us that the key to a better life is education, but education becomes so expensive to you. Right now we are living in an environment where we cannot afford even food to eat, we cannot afford water to drink, we can afford nothing and totally nothing. And that's why when the people of this nation find anything that can bring them to demonstrate, they come out in large numbers. What I want to say today is this. Before, in any demonstration, there was a leader. Now, right now, government is feeling so hard to negotiate because whatever is happening, it is from grassroots level. Everyone is coming out because you feel you are aggrieved. And when you try to look for someone to negotiate with, it's become so hard and become so difficult. So the government is left with one choice, to do what a common mwananchi wants and to emphasize on the rights of a common mwananchi.
That brings us to the heart of the matter that a moment ago Olivia Bizot was alluding to. Otieno Namwaya. In the past, it was the classic opposition versus the government when it came to political showdowns. Here, a largely leaderless movement, and you heard Francis Owino describing a bit some of the pitfalls of that. Why is it different suddenly, this movement born of those anti-tax protests of a year ago?
Sorry, I was muted. I don't think the protests that we are witnessing today are significantly different from the protests we have witnessed previously. The difference right now is probably just that the way the authorities have decided to characterize them and some of the responses from the authorities and the grievances that are driving them are deep-seated, are not necessarily being exploited by the politicians. So if you look at the two narratives that are being pushed by the government, they seem to totally miss the point, and that is angering people even more. The first narrative is that these are people who want to overthrow the government. But you remember that the protests started in 2023. Then they were being led by Raila Odinga, and they were framed as the cost of living protests. But that moved further after the taxation increased. In 2024, there were anti-tax bill protests. But what is happening is that the authorities have refused to address some of the concerns that that people have been raising since 2023: the overtaxation, the corruption, the arrogance, the opulence, and basically the flouting of the constitution and the rule of law. The authorities are not responding to that, and they're continuing with what people have been complaining about over and over. Then the second narrative is that the protesters are violent, they're looting, and they're destroying property. They have deliberately conflated two issues: the issue of looting and the goons. That is separate from the issue of protesters. The protesters are largely peaceful until police start throwing tear gas and shooting directly inside the crowds. The goons, as we have said before, from our monitoring and observation of what has been happening, are linked to government officials. And they seem to be operating with the permission of the police, sometimes hand in hand with the police, sometimes beating protesters together with the police. So I do agree that that needs to be investigated. But the way the government is framing it is that the protesters need to be arrested and shot for looting. I think the issue is that the people within the government who are financing goons and facilitating the looting need to be investigated and prosecuted.
You mentioned there Raila Odinga, the scion of a Kenyan political dynasty. He was a one-time rival of President Ruto. Since that time, though, he seems to have formed kind of an uneasy alliance, if you will, with the sitting president. And after the latest violence on Tuesday, Odinga calling for dialogue.
I think the issue that the authorities are struggling with right now is that in the past, when Odinga led the protest, they could easily go to Odinga and negotiate and agree on a deal, what people call a handshake. And then they'll sit down and call off the protest without the key grievances being addressed. Right now, without a leader, I think the government is struggling to understand how who to negotiate with and how to end the protest. What they probably needed to have done is simply to recognize that this is a more organic and deep-seated movement, a movement that is grassroots-oriented. And they needed to address, to begin to respond to the real grievances that have been there for a long time, which Odinga has been riding on over the years. Now, with him deserting and joining the government, I think part of the protests are happening because people feel they were abandoned. And therefore, there's no leader, and they need to take issues into their own hands. They need to take their own destiny forward. And the protests are happening without Raila, partly because they feel that Raila abandoned them and went to negotiate and ride on their grievances.
Let's listen to Raila Odinga again, speaking on Tuesday after those Saba Saba Day protests, calling for dialogue.
Such a national conclave must have a clear terms of reference and be populated and helmed by the most serious and sober minds in our nation. The proceeds of the national dialogue be subjected to a referendum.
Francis Owino, what's your reaction when you hear those words?
I have a lot of reaction, and I will say without contradicting myself that Raila has betrayed this country.
Betrayed?
And yes. Because him calling for dialogue right now, he has called for dialogue from 1997 when he joined hands with President Mob. He joined hands with Moi Kibaki and called for another dialogue. He joined hands with Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta and he called for dialogue. Now, right now, he's still calling for dialogue after joining hands with William Samoei Ruto. This is a situation where when you feel aggrieved, you fight and fight so that you can join government. And when you join government, you follow the laws that favors you. Right now, the reason why they are talking about dialogue is because they feel like the demonstrations that are now and the demonstrations that are ongoing, they are organic demonstrations, that they are leaderless, and they are demonstrations that you must address the issue that are pertaining the people of this nation. One of the reasons why they feel like it is more that they can chew, it is because before, when a demonstration happens, it was either Raila is the leader of that demonstration. And that's why right now, they have to talk about dialogue and dialogue and dialogue. But they are forgetting there is a lot of issues that they need to address before even going towards that dialogue. There is the issue of extrajudicial killing. There is the issue of corruption. There is a lot of issues. We have been going to court. We have done a lot of things so that this government can hear our voices. And the only thing that is remaining right now, we are ready to take any bullet so that we can make sure there is a change, and a change that can make this country be conducive for all of us.
Olivia Bizot, by the way, we've lost the connection with Member of Parliament Robert Bukoze Satya. So that's why he's not in this conversation right now. Olivia Bizot, again, is there the sense that there's kind of a vacuum when it comes to people in the opposition? After all, there's so many important civil society groups within Kenya. Can they pick up the slack, or do you need a politician at this point?
Yes, I think there's definitely a vacuum in the opposition because Raila Odinga was for such a long time the main opposition figure in Kenya. And I think that was a very interesting point that was made, was that usually politicians dealt with these protests through this dialogue and this famous handshake. And they can't do that anymore. And I think President William Ruto has a long history of doing that. And he's very good at politics and he's very good at talking with politicians. But now he's struggling to know what to do because there's no clear leader to negotiate with. And even Raila Odinga and Ruto have talked about this dialogue, but who exactly are they having this dialogue with? Because this is such a broad movement now. And I think another big change in these protests, this protest movement that is taking place compared to previous protests, is that it's happening nationwide. In the past, protests were mostly confined to major cities like Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, and now they're happening across the country. On the 25th of June, protests took place in 27 of Kenya's 47 counties. Now, that's some of the largest mobilization since the protests that took place in the 1990s. And I think another important shift that's taking place is that usually these politicians operate along ethnic lines. And during these protests, you can see that those are quickly fading away. Now, there has been an attempt by Ruto and his allies to reignite those ethnic tensions by saying notably that the Kikuyus, one of Kenya's largest ethnic group, which produced 3 of Kenya's 5 presidents, he said that they were behind these protests. But on Monday night, one of the main trends on X, formerly known as Twitter, was "We are all Kikuyus." So Kenyans across the country were posting that on social media. And I think that really shows how this youth-led Gen Z movement wants to push away the usual way of doing politics, and they don't want to align themselves with any politicians because now they want to do things incredibly differently.
Otieno Namwaya, in a previous life, you helped mediate when there was the post-electoral violence of 2007, 2008, more than 1,000 killed. And that was very much linked to ethnic identity at the time. Has Kenya changed?
Well, the dynamics around the protests this time are different. In 2007 and 2008, we saw one ethnic group attacking the other, and the police coming in and also killing mostly both sides, but mainly the opposition side. Right now, the anger is across the country. There's no ethnic group that will say this is particularly happy with the government and therefore trying to side with the government, and the other one is attacking the government. Even President Ruto's own background in Eldoret, at the Rift Valley, the protests are taking place. Eldoret had the largest protest in June 2024. Bomet, Kericho. So the ethnic question has basically been dealt with because people have closed ranks and are agreeing on the issues. And one of the big issues that are driving this protest is the fact that people feel that the leadership has set aside the constitution and they're doing things outside the constitution. Remember, this constitution, people fought for it for over 20 years and people shed blood. And people thought that this constitution will guard them against excesses by leaders in government. But people see those excesses, which are against the constitution, and the government doesn't want to listen when people point out that the constitution needs to be respected. And that also negates Raila's call for negotiations or dialogue and minimum reforms. You can't talk about reforms when the existing law and the institutions that are supposed to be guarding people against those excesses are not being respected. They need first to implement the constitution, allow the institutions like the police to work independently, accountability institutions like the Independent Policing Oversight Authority to be able to work, Kenya National Commission on Human Rights to be able to work, which they're not allowing. Once you do that and allow them to work and allow Parliament to legislate freely, then you begin to look at the loopholes. Right now, people don't know what the loopholes are because President Ruto seems to have set aside the constitution and governing whimsically.
But Otieno, your remit now is not just Kenya at Human Rights Watch, it's the whole of the continent. How many countries in Africa can you say where you have, for instance, like after the death of Albert Ojwang, the coroner coming out and saying he was beaten in custody, the arrests of police officers happening, suspension of a police chief in particular. Kenya's an outlier in that respect. Are you the institutions are imperfect, but they're working better than in most places?
There is an appearance of working, especially when there's a low-lying fruit like the killing of a social media activist like Ojwang embarrasses the government, and people feel like we need to be seen to be doing something. But when you look at the long-term trend of some of these pronouncements and appearances of the institutions working, especially for the last 2 years, is that there's no accountability. In 2023, the government itself admitted that about 70 people were killed. Out of those 70, how many have been? How many families have gotten justice? How many police officers have been prosecuted? In 2024, during the protests that went all the way up to Parliament, the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights has documented about 61 who were killed. IPOA, which is the Independent Policing Oversight Authority, has said they're investigating the 60 deaths. But how many have been prosecuted? So, and then if you look at the way the killings and abductions happened in 2024, all the way up to early this year, there's no investigation of the abductions. A lot of those killings have not even been mentioned. Because if you go deep into the villages, you'll discover that what happened in 2024, after the protests, police went into the neighborhoods shooting into people's houses, killing people, abducting people. Most of them abducted quietly, and they have not even been mentioned. So if you look at the actual numbers of the people who have been killed and abducted, they are higher. And that is the same as what we have this year. So in terms of actual accountability, we are having a problem.
Francis Owino, what's the strategy going forward for people who are braving tear gas and bullets?
Strategy is very easy. You know, we are not riding on a very simple environment or a very easy environment, because we are riding on an environment that I can be kidnapped anytime, I can be maimed anytime, and I can be killed anytime. But there is only one thing I always say. I would rather die right now rather than watch my kids suffering for not doing what is right or not doing what I should do when I have a chance to. I will tell my fellow youth, let us just keep pushing. We are almost getting where we are going. Let us just remain focused with what we are doing. Even if the police or the government might bring as many guns as they want, so that we would look bad. As long as we, as a common mwananchi, as long as we as activists, we know what we are doing, and the dream we have, and the path that we are focused on, we will keep pushing until this country is conducive for everyone, no matter how hard it will be. But I believe at one point we shall reach where we are going, and we shall achieve our goal.
All right, one final question, just to be complete. Olivia Bizot, we've mentioned Kenya's institution, the politicians, the civil society, the activists, the court system. There's another institution, which is the press. They tried the other day to stop live coverage of the protests, and they quickly had to backtrack after an injunction. How's the coverage been since in the last month?
Yeah, well, a lot of journalists, especially local journalists I've spoken to, are incredibly afraid at the moment. It's becoming increasingly dangerous to do their jobs properly. As you said, on the 25th of June, there was an attempt to block all live radio and television coverage of those protests. And there has definitely been a shift since last year that I've noticed, because at the beginning of the protests in June, when we went to go and cover them, initially we were able to sort of film and do our coverage behind the security officers who would sort of protect us. And also when we showed our press cards, there was a sort of obligation to not attack us. But now the situation is incredibly different than it was at the beginning of those demonstrations, and even towards the end of the demonstrations last year. I was specifically attacked, and there was tear gas fired specifically at me and other journalists around me. So that is a trend that's increasing, and people are getting more and more afraid on social media as well, because after the 25th of June protest, people published planning of the protest, for example, on social media, and all of those people who posted any criticism of the government or who planned the protests online were abducted, for example, or arrested. So there are those increasing trends, and I think there is fear relating to the point that you mentioned before of how this relates to a broader context in the region. There is fear that Kenya is increasingly shifting towards the authoritarian ways of the leaders of countries like neighbouring Uganda and Tanzania, for example, because last year the main opposition leader of Tanzania, Tundu Lissu, said in an interview with the BBC that he hopes that Tanzania will one day be able to be in the situation of Kenya when it comes to its democratic space. But that space is quickly fading because Ruto is employing similar tactics. I mean, the police are using a huge amount of force that human rights groups say is incredibly excessive. And there is a crackdown on political opponents and the targeting of opposition figures.
Olivia Bizot, many thanks. I want to thank as well Otieno Anamwaya, Francis Owino, Robert Pukoze Satya for joining us earlier. Thank you for being with us here. More coverage on our website, france24.com.